Coming up on this week's edition of Sunday Nation, the state of affairs in Detroit. Are we in a state of anarchy? Detroit Police Chief James White is here to talk to us. And of course, and then my conversation with Chris Collins, the president and artistic director of the Detroit International Jazz Festival Foundation. And then Kenyatta Stevens, the CEO of Black Family Development, is here to talk to us about an event they have coming up and the essence of an organization like Black Family in the trenches, helping to address those who are dealing with inequities. All coming up on this week's edition of Sunday Nation. It is a packed schedule. Stay with us right after this break. Let's bring in Detroit Police Chief James White here on Sunday Nation. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's a lot happening. It's almost leads me to the question, is it a state of anarchy in the city of Detroit? Rampant gun violence. Just every now and then, you know, every other day there's some shooting somewhere. We're seeing you on the TV screens responding to all these things that are happening. What is exactly going on? Is the police department prepared to really tackle what is happening right now in the city of Detroit under your leadership?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's a state of anarchy at all.
Right.
In fact, you know, gun violence is up around the country, but we're seeing a significant decrease in non-fatal shootings, which is our measurement for our plans working, our protocols working, our strategies working. We've got, as of today, 11% reduction, but still, with that 11% reduction, it still represents too many shootings in our community.
But when you say non-fatal, though, and we see all this, the violence that is taking place, you know, is that satisfactory?
No, it's not. It's not satisfactory. Anytime you have a situation where someone is being shot, it's not satisfactory. But you know, we have to have some benchmarks, some measurables to see if our strategies work. And last year, I released a 5-point plan for our crime strategy for the city. And so we measure that as we go into 2023 with our new strategy for next year with lessons learned. And so we do see that 111 less people were shot this year than last year, but we're not satisfied. There's a lot of work to be done. There's way too much gun violence in our community, way too many people with weapons, way too many people using weapons to resolve simple conflict.
But what is the department doing in terms of getting those guns off the streets?
Well, we're doing a number of things. Number one, we're working with our ceasefire unit. We're also working with the courts because we've got a lot of repeat offenders. We've got people who are out on tether that are using weapons. But I read in the paper recently that there's a 50% increase over the past 3 years in gun ownership. There are a lot more guns on the street to get off the street. But you have to do this thing delicately. You have to be constitutional. You're not going to just randomly stop people looking for guns. It has to be part of an overall crime strategy, and that's what we've deployed.
I want to punctuate that constitutional policing. I mean, that has become perhaps part of the national theme here for police reform, racial equity, racial justice.
Absolutely.
Detroit is the nation's largest black city, and you've been a black man in the seat of police chief. Certainly, the issue of constitutional policing plays a lot here. Most recently, and I know the issues in litigation here, but the question of, was it Porter Brooks, the young man who was said to be mentally ill, shot by officers fatally. Does that raise constitutional questions here?
No, not in that instance, and I say that affirmatively. We had a very tragic situation, and my heart still goes out, and my condolences to the family of Mr. Burks. But that was a tragic situation, punctuated by, to use your term, a failed mental health system in our state. We know that we have not had a mental health treatment facility in our state in a very long time. The good news is that we're on our way to having one again, but long-term treatment is the key, not just medication and release. I can't talk about the case because of the litigation,
right.
But just speaking globally, we have already year-to-date over 20,000 calls for service for mental health runs.
So let's do an inventory of the police department here. When you look at, when we put the lens, the microscope on the police department on mental health, do you have the capacity to respond to mental health challenges in the community?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And, you know, this is.
And I want an honest answer.
And I'm going to give you an honest answer. You know, this is in our lap. We didn't ask for it. We had responded to mental health crisis runs in my 27-year career at a lesser rate than we are right now. But this is our crisis, and we didn't want it, we didn't have it, and we have to be prepared to deal with it. And so what we're doing right now is recalibrating our response. We have a very effective CIT program, but in reality, CIT is a tool. It is not a solution. It is not something that we can say, hey, everything's good here because CIT deployed. These are situations that are unpredictable. When people are in mental health crisis, their behavior is unpredictable. This is why their family called the police, because they're unpredictable. And so the officers are there to stabilize from an emotional standpoint, from an encounter standpoint. But they are not doctors. They are not mental health providers. They are not mental health professionals. They are people who are trained in de-escalation. And if that de-escalation works and we're able to get them to a treatment facility, fantastic. But when you look at, and the success rate is great, but we're not here to talk about the success rate. No, we talk about the ones that were not successful. And so we are recalibrating our response, and we are going to be much more involved in a more elaborate program, including a number of different things I'll be announcing in a couple weeks.
So you've been you're a veteran of the department. You came through the ranks to now becoming the top cop in America's largest black city. The question, though, is when you look at the mental health crisis and challenges right now that we see with the police department, and of course the fact that you don't have what it takes to respond to all these mental health challenges, how far back do you think it takes back the department?
Well, I don't think it can take back the department. I think that what the department has to do is recalibrate, and be more responsive. And I've talked and have the complete support of the mayor's office with this, is really expanding our mental health response. It's here. We can't not respond to the runs. We got 20,000 runs year to date that people are calling the police. And even with all the recent news articles, those numbers don't stop. Those calls still come in. It would be irresponsible. It would be professional malpractice not to have a more comprehensive response and recalibration and more resources. But it does require more resources, and it can't just be the police. It's got to be the community, it's got to be the clergy, it's got to be the mental health facilities and the police. If we're the only option, it's going to fail, because we are not the mental health police. We're the police that know something about de-escalation and mental health.
There's so much I want to talk about also in the context of mental health, but let me move the conversation a little bit on this issue of constitutional policing. And certainly this was not under your watch. It was the previous leadership of the police department. The settlement regarding Detroit will breed the demonstrations in the wake of the George Floyd 2020 campaign and so forth, the death of George Floyd. I'm just thinking moving forward here, because I've covered city council for a long time, and I know settlements, police settlements, perhaps accounts for a significant number of millions that goes towards settling police complaints, on issues of police brutality and so forth. Things that have taken place, before your elevation to police chief, though. How do you see moving forward the department in terms of some of the questionable practices in the department when it comes to police complaints, police misconduct that normally leads to millions of dollars of settlements with the city council? How do you see that under your watch moving forward to ensure that perhaps Detroit is not paying more but paying less, and is reflected in the conduct of the officers, the men and women in blue?
Yeah, so we have a number of different things that we have in place.
Yeah.
And I spent...
And this goes back to way the Archer administration, when Detroit was under the Justice Department, consent decree and all of that, coming way back.
100%. And let me say this, I was with the department for 25 years before I retired.
Right.
And I spent a year with the state, and I came back as chief. So I own some of the historical moments too. I was I was an assistant chief for a number of years. Now, I spent a large part of my career as the assistant chief over the consent judgment. So I recognize that the department has not always conducted itself appropriately. I know that, right? I investigated that. That's how I made my career in this organization, with reforms and policies. I wrote a lot of the policies, and I looked at the investigation that was provided by the federal government. It was not a shining moment for the police department. I operate every day with that in the back of my mind, that we have to be a constitutional police department, and we are. But that doesn't mean that people are not going to disagree with you. It doesn't mean that you may not have a misstep, and that you have to be transparent with it, public with it, and change. You don't just have a problem or a failure and keep the problem in failure. You're transparent, you're public. You mentioned when we first sat down, I see you on TV. You know, that's not one of my favorite things to do, but it's the vehicle that I have to use to be transparent to our community, which is something I'm responsible for. The message must come from me. As it relates to lawsuits and things such as that, we have a way now where we do what's called a management awareness system, where we monitor behavior. We have a process where we reduce liability, we get officers trained, and officers that are doing the job, we're going to support them 100%. We're going to stand up for them, we're going to stand with them. Officers that cross the line, there's no room for that in policing. You have to be accountable on both ends. The ones that are doing it fantastically, that 99% plus, that's fantastic. The ones that cross the line, there's no room for that in an organization that is considered progressive and constitutional. This is a job that you can do it 99% of the time correct and still fail. And that failure is too great. It's too great to the community, it's too great for the credibility of the organization, and it's too great for the men and women who do the job right and want to be received as professional police officers. And I'll say one more thing about that. When you talk about, you know, what it means to have credibility in a community, you own credibility for the moment in time that you have it. One incident can erode the credibility of a police agency. One bad police incident you will lose that credibility. That credibility is not guaranteed, and that trust for the community is not guaranteed.
All right, let's go on a quick break. More of our conversation with Detroit Police Chief James White right after this break.